Hello, book lovers! Welcome back to our book club. This month we are doing 1984 by George Orwell. I'm Marisa Serafini, of course, joined by
I am Phil Svitek, excited to be here to talk about this very seminal book.
very seminal book. Yeah, I chose this book for the month of May because this is clearly actually one of the most banned books right now in America. And when you read it and comprehend it, you can understand why it's banned. So we'll get into that. I thought it'd be really interesting. I have never read it. It's a famous book. Um, Again, I'm young. It wasn't really introduced to me. I hear some schools and stuff like it's one of these books that makes kids read. This was never on my roster. So as a current forever student, I just wanted to read this. I was like, this sounds interesting. Why not? And let's go into quick thoughts. Phil, I know you read it before, but what was your experience reading it the first time compared to reading it the second time?
Yeah, so the first time, I read it during COVID, which both seems like yesterday as well as like 10 years ago. And, kind of probably much to your curiosity, it was like, okay, a lot of people reference this book. There's a lot of talk about it. And I think people misquote it. So let me just read the source material first and foremost so I truly understand it. And I'd read George Orwell's Animal Farm. Obviously, that's a very famous one. Just a quick side note, there's going to be an Andy Serkis movie coming out uh, called Animal Farm. So it's an adaptation. So that's the one I was more familiar with as far as like actually having read it. But yeah, more specifically of now and then, I think now you start to see these things elevated. Before it might have been, okay, a cautionary tale. Now it feels like, okay, are we living through? I know we're living through some of this. To what percentage, I think, becomes the debate. And so that's the scary part about it. And yeah, as we talk about George Orwell, he lived in a time of obviously the Cold War and things like that. That's where a lot of his writing comes from. So it was both a reflection of, but at the same time, a warning, right? And so it's interesting in the grand scheme of things, not a long time period, how history is already repeating itself just with new paint brushes and
Yeah,
scenery. So
in a new color.
yeah.
Um, yeah, agreed. And this book was written in 1949. But it's called 1984, which is still within few decades. There are still people alive who have been through that time. So it's still relevant, very close to today's age. And like you said, history repeats itself. But the thing that we learned about this book is the history accurate? Is it what we know to believe or what has been forced upon us to believe now compared to what it was in the original context? And I think that's the interesting thing that like I find out because we find a lot of memories and stuff, especially when we go back and recount, especially in like heightened emotions and stuff. You're like, oh, is that really how it happened? When you're recounting moments and you're like, oh, but can you judge your memory and how exact and specific it is compared to what someone else would tell you how the same situation went? And I think that they really go into that in this book. So yeah, just a little bit about George Orwell. I've heard of him. I have never actually read him, so this was like a nice typical introduction to me of his writing, and shoot, it made me want to read Animal Farm afterwards. But yeah, a little bit about him. He grew up, or he was born in India, and died in England, London, England. He was a novelist, essayist, and critic famous for his novels. Animal Farm in 1984. He was born a different name, actually, Eric Arthur Blair, and he never entirely abandoned his original name, but his first book was under George Orwell's name. So it became his pen name. basically he like you said, during wartime, he grew up during wartime, and his father was a British official in the Indian Civil Service, and then his mother was the daughter of an unsuccessful teak merchant, and so they always had like different types of mentalities growing up. And then um, he went to preparatory school, and then he was an assistant district superintendent in the Indian Imperial Police over in Burma in 1922. And from there, he learned a lot about the police force and what they do. And having felt guilty that barriers of the race and caste system has prevented with him in the Burmese economy, he thought he could like go on the flip side and immerse himself into the life of the poor and the outcasts. So like going from like one high end class to the lower class, he saw both experiences, and that was like pretty much the genesis of how he started writing about down and out in Paris and London. And we can see that in 1984, the difference of the caste system and the class system, and how they fight against each other, how they stay in power and stuff. So yeah, it was just like a lot of military experience and exposure to both different worlds. And I think it's very, very interesting, because very rarely do you see that, if ever. And I think it's nice to be exposed to two different extremes in that way, and to write it into a book form that we can kind of experience ourselves. I think it's very, very interesting. Yeah, and unfortunately, he died from tuberculosis in a hospital in London in 1950. So not very long after 1984 came out. So just a little bit about George Orwell, and we'll go into the book now. We have our main character, Winston Smith. What were your first thoughts of Winston? With the way that they introduced the character, how he's already questioning everything that's going on in society, what he sees around him. What were your first thoughts of Winston?
Yeah, as far as Winston, ultimately, it's interesting because he's right there as far as his job, right? Rewriting history. So he's a part of that. He knows first and foremost, like he's not just kind of consuming on the news and being, for lack of a better term, just any other profession. Like he's an active participant, both in terms of helping the government and Big Brother, whatever we want to call him ultimately, but also trying to resist it, right? And
Right.
it's sort of, in a similar vein that Philip K. Dick has with, like, let's say, A Scanner Darkly, the lines of reality start to become blurred. Now, whereas Scanner Darkly is much more about the effect of drugs on human beings, but also with the idea of government kind of, manipulating you. This one is just more purely psychological government sort of warfare, of what's real, what's not real. And the fact that he's literally changing the past, right? So that notion of the victors get to rewrite history, this is an ongoing
Hmm.
process. So, if at one point something happened, but then a new regime takes place, then they'll just change it up so that way, whatever the new regime becomes, then at the end of the day, they can just rewrite the past to fit their needs. So it's a very active and fluid Google Doc of history, if you will, right?
Right.
And which is very scary, you know? So,
It, it is. And I think the interesting thing about his job, and he was in the records department, and he even had the self awareness. It's like, hey, this is what was actually true. But they want us to change these details just a little bit more for people to believe this actually happened, erase what was actually true, and like condition people to believe that this is the correct, the thing that like we changed and revised is actually the correct truth. And and then like even the physical effects of deleting history, like he would take pieces of papers and documents and like literally burn it up in flames as if it never happened. and like just deleting it. There's no physical evident proof that that history existed. I mean, we only remember it, and you only know the people who experienced it or like have it in memory, but it's not written down. Therefore, it kind of like loses its credibility because you can't find it documented anywhere. It's like, do you have it on record? Nope. So then I guess it never happened. And that's the scary part when, you give the power to the people who want to rewrite history to train people. This is what actually happened compared to what actually truly happened that has now been burnt to ashes. And I love that George. I love that Winston was already self-aware of that, and he's like, "Oh, questioning. Hey, that's not right. What else? If they're making us doing this, what else is the so-called government party is doing to the rest of the community?" And I think that's a scary realization.
Yeah, of course. Like it's one of those tough things that's hard to bring up like real life examples because you could point to so many, but I guess I'll say it in this way. Now in the age of just AI, right, and it continues to be better and better. Even when you can see like recorded video, quote unquote, it's like people can poke holes at it or whatever and be like, no, that's not real. Or you can take something that was real and alter it, right? And to the point about like Winston and memory, even then, like how easy is it to manipulate someone into believing that like, hey, what you saw was not what you saw, right? And so that's
Mhm.
a side of it too. Um, and so yeah, there's just so many angles to it that discredit your own belief system, and that's the side of it that's scary, is when you can't even ultimately believe yourself, while at the same time there are people who will tell you what to believe. I mean, just as a quick anecdote, if you will, the thing that I realized not too long ago about like conspiracy theories is that there's no room for doubt. And what I mean by this is that if you're talking to somebody that is just convinced they know exactly what happened at such and such event, and it's like, but you weren't even there. Like, at least leave like a 0.5% that you could be
Mhm.
wrong, because you seem to know exactly what happened on August 4th of whatever year in another part of the world entirely that you've never even visited. Right? So it's like, how
Yeah.
how
Right.
can you without a shadow of a doubt you seem to know this? And so that to me is the big scary part that certainly the book illustrates, is that people just have this blind confidence. And I guess to even extract it further, when you sort of look at it, um, in this day and age that we live in, we could point to various sides can argue of like, well, these people aren't educated and whatever. Well, I guess the question that this book certainly raises is, people might be educated. It just depends where that they're pulling that education from. Because if they're educated from a certain book that's been heavily altered, then they know that
Mhm.
book as opposed to the truth. And so George Orwell in a way was presenting relativism before that was kind of, I think, a mainstream thing. So I don't know. That's a lot of
Right.
thoughts all in one.
No, but it's also true because it's talked about, yeah, the education, and like we see it in today's society with our class system and education system. Those who are educated, quote unquote, tend to succeed and have better positions and jobs, therefore make more money, and therefore have a higher status than most. And it's usually the middle class are trying to get to the high class, and then the high class is like completely like ignoring everybody else, but they only care about their position, and like how do they maintain staying on top. And the middle's always like striving for more, whereas the lower class is always just like, well, we're here, we're stuck here, and they're generally lower on life, and usually we'll just stay stuck there, um with like being with this already defeatist mentality of like, well, we can't go anywhere, so we're never going to get to that level of the high class. And like you see the power shift, you see the power dynamic, um definitely in this book, definitely in today's society, it hasn't really changed. It really hasn't. And I think that's where, that goes down to the individual who wants to learn more, who's curious enough, who's hardworking enough to get themselves from one place to another. And I think that's like, you see it. You see stories from rags to riches all the time. So I think it's like really based on the person's character rather than the collective whole. And I think that's that's a big theme that they come into with this book is like the individualism that we have as people, our self freedom compared to the collective, what we can do as a group, and how limited of a power we have as a society compared to our individual power. It's Yeah, they really go into it in this book, and I find them very, very fascinating. Um, let's go into, we talked about the individual and collectivism a bit. I brought it up, might as well. Uh, what were your thoughts of this so-called new language that they have in this book? We have the doublethink, we have newspeak. Just to clarify, doublethink is the key concept of the party's manipulation of its citizens, the ability to hold two contradictory beliefs simultaneously and accept both of them as true. This process allows the party to control reality and deceive its populace without them realizing it. So that's doublethink, contradictory. Newspeak is the invented language that corrupts English until it's unintelligible. The epilogue tells us that 1984, there's no that is at the beginning of the book. It says like not everyone is like fluent yet. It's not the primary language, but that they're making that the standard. So, what are your thoughts of this like confusing, convoluted language that they are imposing onto the citizens of Oceania?
Yeah, I mean, it's language, and it's also the book also opens up with they don't even know what actual year it is. Like it's called 1984, but they don't really know that it's 1984, right?
Right.
And I think it all like that's the beautiful part about the book is that it all ties together ultimately, between not knowing the year, between all this language shifting and the meaning of words, no different than you take a word like woke, right? It started to
Hmm.
mean one thing, and then now it gets bastardized and thrown around, and now no one really knows what it means. It's taken on a whole different thing, and so the evolution of words is very evident for sure, and I think it ties together in the bucket that you talked about of collectivism versus individualism, and I think it's beautifully illustrated through the love story of Julia and Winston, because ultimately there's such a love that they're trying to explore, and you know like that's just two people trying to come together, and by the end they can't really trust each other because of all the events that occurred. And so when you talk about an uprising within society, within this society, yes, the masses have the power in theory, but that's only if they come together. And if like two people that have arguably one of the highest forms of love, which is romance, towards each other can't reconcile, well, what the hell kind of hope do the rest of us have? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like, and that's is the sad that admittedly this is a very downer book, and I wasn't expecting a happy book, but I was like, oh man, it hits you hard with awareness and realism, and you're like, oh crap, man. um, and I think that's the thing, like it teased the audience. It's like this is the one thing that I don't know, audience are conditioned. We're hoping for a happy relationship, the guy gets the girl at the end or the girl gets the guy at the end. Like they had the happy romance, like their love superseded everything and it didn't. And that's the unfortunate thing. Is like you hope that they end up together, but like even that they couldn't stay together compared to um because of what the society did to them and like the party and all the torture and stuff and then, like what has been imposed upon them, they couldn't even manage to stay together through that. Like, what hope does anybody else have? Like, they seem like the most able couple. And they're like, well, there goes that. Um, very disappointing. Very disappointing. Were you expecting that? I mean, we did bring up Julia because Julia is the 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 woman. I wouldn't say foil, but she basically became a foil to Winston. She's just another person who's also questioning everything that's happening. She realizes all the BS, and that's where Julia and Winston get along because they know something's up. They know that, like, hey, something's wrong. We need to go against this. And while they're doing that, they find, a sexual relationship, romance brewing and stuff. But at the end, through all the torture, um, they, not to skip ahead, but like even at the end, when they don't stay together and they both realize they betrayed each other. What were your thoughts of that and how the fallout of the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, it's introduced very early on the idea that like it's just so hard to trust anybody because if someone's nice to you, that automatic filter goes through your mind. Why are they being nice? Why are they doing
Right.
this? Are they genuine or are they a spy? And when you just cannot tell the truth from fiction, like that's the victory, right? And um, so, like you, yes, when I read it, I wanted a glimmer of hope, just like anything of like, okay, sure, society sucks, everything's going to hell, but at least these two people will have each other, sort of an aspect,
Right.
right? That that
Right.
that that is not the case in any circumstance, and um, the party really wins. So it is very depressing, and forgive me for like kind of nudging this, but both like 1984, the term, and Big Brother, there is kind of a weird aspect that like there were commercials done by Apple about 1984 in 1984. And we reference that as like this thing, and the fact that we have a reality TV show called Big Brother that's so successful, like
Big Brother.
just this decay of meaning ultimately, you know, um, goes back to the idea of like I wouldn't call it like newspeak or doublethink or whatever, but it is an aspect of just degradation of what the original term was intended to be.
Right.
So
Yeah, agreed with all that. And I think the thing is also, I mean, you kind of brought it up, but the idea of Big Brothers, like I think just growing up in our generation and stuff, I always heard of when I read Big Brother and always heard of it, I always just thought of, oh, someone's always watching. Someone always is watching, recording your movements, everything you say, everything you do, everything you think. Like they'll somehow use that information against you. So like that ideology has always been passed on to me, and I haven't even read the book. And it's like I get it. This is like the source material. I get it. I mean, I'm sure like we've had a lot of that, but I don't know. I think it's because it's become a very mainstream in the last few decades with TV and media and stuff. So it's like I think we're understanding because we live in a world where we can actually go back and watch things and how they truly happened. Um, Compared to nowadays with AI changing things, and like we have the whole idea of deep fakes. Um, and like those videos, if you were truly there, you really know how it happened compared to what everybody sees as a whole. So that it's scary and it's very true and realistic today. And that goes with like just the whole idea of Big Brothers watching, the reoccurring issue that's like, hey, someone's always watching, therefore there's always like a higher being above you who will eventually instill fear and control you in that way. Therefore goes with the oligarchy. And it kind of goes into the I know we're skipping around, but there's just so many things in this book. But that it goes with O'Brien and Big Brother. The character O'Brien, he's a powerful member of the inner party, which is like the whole thing. But he tricks Winston to believing he's a member of the revolutionary group, the Brotherhood, which is like the positive group. That's the rebels, basically. The rebels against the Empire, basically. To make a cultural reference in that way. But turns out O'Brien is actually not part of the Brotherhood, but actually part of Big Brother, part of the inner party. And so during Winston's capture, he reads the manifesto, which kind of just explains everything. That this would be like the big exposition of the book. So what were your thoughts of the manifesto from we
Yeah.
had Emmanuel Goldstein's manifesto that pretty much explains everything that's happening in the current state of Oceania.
Yeah, it's definitely very exposition heavy for sure, but at the same time, it's so fascinating. And I don't know how many like books there were about this sort of thing. So for him to like deduce it into something very succinct, what I think is extraordinary, meaning George Orwell, and something that I think still holds up, right? And so again, I'm very forgiving of it being turning essentially into a nonfiction book in many ways for part of it, because of we all want to sort of know that aspect and what does it all mean. And it's both very eye-opening but unsettling for sure, because it is about the continuation of war, right? One of my favorite lines, I'm going to paraphrase it, and I'm going to butcher paraphrase it, unfortunately, because I don't have it in front of me. But that idea that what's the only form of capitalism that gives money to someone but doesn't help anything? It's war, right? So the military industrial complex, rather than like help society and put money and investments into stuff, let's just go to war. And you start to see that played out over and over even in our lifetimes. Like we've not officially quote unquote declared war, but we've been in war. We are in war, right? Like it's crazy. So there's that aspect of it. And to your earlier point about the Brotherhood and the inner party and all that, one of the very like, so there's Julia and Winston, which was a gut punch, but also the gut punch of like this notion of party number two, they're trying to over party number one. Once that happens, party number two is party number one, and the cycle resets itself. And I was like,
and it goes again.
Yeah. So that was a very depressing, but also it was depressing because of how truthful it was. We're always like rah, rah, rah. And, right now, the tribalism of Democrat versus Republican, Democrats will have to fix with the blah, blah, blah. And I'm not picking a side.
Right.
If anything, I'm standing on the outside and being like, this is literally absurd, because once the Democrats come in power, then they'll be blamed by the Republicans for throwing everything into disarray and yada, yada. And then the cycle continues of BS.
Right. And you could also say just the same thing for generations, like rather than the bipartisan ideas, just like generational. I was like, millennials are blaming boomers, but like we're all waiting for the boomers to die out, and the Gen Xers, and like once millennials are like the top generation, we'll be the class. We'll be class one. It'll be like we're just waiting for the next party to go. And so like it could be thought in a lot of different ways. And I think it's very interesting that George Orwell had the foresight of that so early. But again, it's like history repeats itself. It's like patterns, behaviors repeat itself. Because that's what we were raised to know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we had the American Revolution, the French Revolution. So there's like history does tend to repeat itself. It just takes on a new form, and George Orwell was able to fuse that for sure. And I think what's more palpable about this book for people is that it is a fiction, right? We've covered Imagining Argentina, which was about a real life event. But even that was fiction, because that was like magical realism, where he channeled the spirits of the people that were killed by the totalitarian government of Argentina, right? I'm not sure if you saw
Mhm.
I'm Still Here, but that was about the Brazilian uh, regime of authoritarianism. And like, that was a very incredible movie, and stuff like that. And so, it's weird because I both appreciate this book, but it's also so easy to almost like bastardize in that way. No different than like people do with all kinds of art. But like one of my favorite movies is The Matrix, and people almost like cherry pick what they feel like fits into the narrative. I mean, hell, the the Bible, people love to cherry pick a quote from the Bible and apply it to whatever heinous act that they feel justifies their means or whatever it is.
Right. Right.
So
No, I totally agree because it's like again with the evolution of language. You can call the Catholics out for calling out homosexuality when the Bible says he shall not lay with man. And then they just like put it as an umbrella term for all queerness. You're like, no. Again, with text being translated in a lot of different forms, it's like it takes on a lot of different meanings over all the years. And it's really just up to the person or the people who believe in what they want to believe and who they. So, like, you see the separation between everyone's belief system and how they were raised, what they believe to know is true, what they think is true, how it should be true. And that's that is why the world is in a constant state of conflict.
let me
And like you, oh yeah,
no, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was like you even mentioned war with the capitalism, just to tie it back just a little bit. Like I think helpful with media, and this will make sense to you, and especially for a future conversation. Season 2 of Legend of Korra, they go into a civil war. The North and South poles of the water tribes, they go into literally a civil war. And who's the one who comes out on top financially? It's Varric, and he even admits it. He's like, how else can you make money? Because he inflicted the war, he encouraged it. He's like, I encouraged the war on everybody because I know I'd come out top with all the money. Therefore he went to jail and stuff. But like that's what's happening in real society. Like it makes sense. War is the only thing where no parties win, but one person does like win in other ways. And like so it's very frustrating if we see it over and over and over again. Therefore, capitalism versus all this other stuff is just like we see different parties and different motivations screw each other over for different reasons.
Yeah, there's this isn't the point that I was trying to make, but Fahrenheit 9/11 by Michael Moore, the documentary. And listen, I get that people have their opinions on Michael Moore and his work. It is what it is.
Mhm.
But my bigger point is that at the end of that movie, he quoted specifically this line. That's why, like, I kind of knew about it to begin with, and it always stuck with me. Uh, where he used like the Iraq War as this, he references as a perpetuation of just an ongoing thing, and he quotes Orwell of this idea like it's not meant to be won, it's meant to keep going, and that's what keeps everyone in line in society and stuff like that. And as a documentary, and I'll use the term documentary loosely for the benefit of others, not necessarily me. It works, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah. Now, I want to posit to you a solution, maybe not a solution, but maybe an optimistic viewpoint of how I deal with this in life. And this literally came to me as we're talking. You let me know and feel free to poke holes if you'd like. So
Okay.
we live in a society that ultimately, whatever, nothing's true. We don't know anything. Blah blah blah. I think as I'd like to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism and always be questioning, always be learning, but never be closed minded where I can't change my mind, and to always approach all the things that I do with a kind heart. And as shitty as it may be, if someone does something negative or whatever, kind of taking it on the chin, which I know is easier said than done in many cases, but sticking to the idea, well, that says a lot more about them than it does me. And so rather than myself be allowed to be burdened of what's true, what's not true, what's, is this person good? Is this person not? Just kind of going and living life essentially, if you will. And where it takes me, but I will have no regret.
Right. I agree with that. I think something as I find myself getting, just as a person getting older and going through more experiences and stuff, I find there are more disingenuine people than there are genuine people. And, that's very, very frustrating. That's just like that's my only personal point of view. That's the people I've been surrounded with. So I find today I spend my time with the people that I choose. I surround myself with my quote unquote, community. Like these are the people we are like minded. And I've become very, very choosy about who and where I spend my time. And like I've gone to protests, I've gone to I will insert myself into places and with people who I want to be, because I know we have the same type of mentality. And those who are against my mentality, sure, I completely understand your opinion, I completely understand your beliefs, but you can stay over there and I'll stay in my corner, you can stay over there. We can coexist. We don't have to fight each other. Yeah, we can just like argue and disagree on stuff, but like at the end of the day, we're our own. This is where the individualism comes. We're our own people. We have our own thoughts and beliefs, and we can hang out whoever we want to. Um, and I think it's like where you spend your energy. Um, I think is a big, big key.
Sure, but here's what's cool about that point of view as well. Yes, it's individualistic, but paradoxically, it's collectivist because you're allowing that grace for other people to live their life and hold their belief, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's that sort of weird duality. Like you're seeing their humanity, which recognizes that we are part of a greater whole. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. We're just pieces in a puzzle in the great whole. And that's the thing. Like when I was reading this book, I just realized like you and I like to think we're both intelligent enough to be very self-aware of everything that's going on. Another reason why we're reading this book. But also you and I would be sent straight to room 101. We really would be. Because we are the people who can see the bullshit, question it, smart enough to do something about it, fight back, rebel against that way, and be forced upon other people to do a certain thing, believe a certain way. And you and I would be sent straight to room 101
I think
if
so,
we
but
ever got to
it's
that point.
also it is, there are aspects that I think just the hardships of our modern society is that just the news cycle is so fast that you can't even quote unquote begin to do your own research, you know? And I know it's a heavy topic, but it's like I don't feel informed enough to know about Gaza and Israel, for example. And yes, I have an overall moral stance and whatever, but the idea that I know their history and especially know exactly what is happening today when there is that moment of okay, what's real, what's not, and where's it being reported from. So if anything, I've like become more kind of like you skeptical of the systems. So there's I forget who says it, but there's a woman I work with, Elise Loon, and she quotes it all the time. Now I can't attribute it to her, but it's thanks to her that I know it. That we have to be hard on systems and be kind on people, or soft on people rather, right? And I think that's where we make the mistake, right, is that sometimes we're soft on systems and very hard on people, like you piece of crap, and it's like whoa, and I think that's the sort of better way, and yeah, just kind of ultimately knowing that you don't know, or at least you don't know without a shadow of a doubt, and that we need to just ultimately stop thinking we know everything, and just understanding that. I don't know. I think that's like a healthy dose of I don't know. When in this world, everyone just forces you to be an expert in something, and furthermore, sometimes an expert in everything. It's like I don't have an opinion on how much spice should be added to something. Like, why are you asking? I don't know. I'm not a chef.
Right.
You know?
And I think it goes to show there's more pressure on us to know more information because we have better access to information today than we did back in 1980, than we did back in 1960. You know, we have the internet. We literally have all the information that we need of the world in our back pocket, which we didn't have decades ago. So it's like there's this like unnecessary pressure for us. And I was like, oh, you didn't know this? Why not? It's on the news. But it's like, but not everybody reads the news or listens to the news or watches the news. You know, it's just like there's a lot of different pressures these days than we had. You know, and you see the evolution of how media changes things, how people orators change stories. It's just like you see the differences of history and what has actually happened. Yeah, that's it's still going on today, and that's the the hard pill to swallow of this book. I want to talk about a little bit of the checks and balance systems. Basically, it was like our current government has this, fortunately, but this is also what they have kind of in their caste system, the checks and balances, and just the idea of this never-ending cyclical war and retention of power. What were your thoughts of the whole I don't want to say brainwashing, but the whole idea of like Oceania has always been at war with Eurasia, when in reality, Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. So like again with the doublethink, so all these things that are posed on to people, what they were led to believe compared to what actually was happening, and therefore this convoluted cycle of who's in power, who's at war with each other, who's not.
So the question is, what are my thoughts on that? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
you see, that was kind of a convoluted question as well. Yes, but what were your thoughts of just like the retention of power, basically, and how we make people think this is what's happening?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of all the things that we've been talking about: the news, the people in power, whoever's in power. Again, I mean, as I mentioned, the real life example of Israel and Gaza. It's the question of what is real, what is not, and so in many ways, the point of fiction is to point out the aspects of our lives that so we can be a little bit more aware of those things and when it's happening, because as we're sort of living through it, you know, I'm not going to say we're exactly in sort of this version of 1930s Hitler slash Nazi Germany, but when you sort of look back at history, it's like, how could the Germans just allow this, Holocaust to happen? Because it happened slowly over a long time. And that's it, so you start to kind of see you just have to know those things, because in our day to day, are you like, I understand that you and I might be worried about, capitalism, authoritarianism, and all this, but it's also exhausting in the day to day application, because you're trying to get to work, you're trying to make money, you're trying to get home, maybe eat, maybe like enjoy at least maybe 30 minutes of a TV show so you can sleep, all to do it again. And the thought of doing anything beyond that is just so exhausting that in many ways it's the system beating you up. And so when someone tells you, like, hey, you should care about this, you're like, okay, whatever. No, you should care, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. Let's, and when they feed you that information,
Mhm.
you're much more apt to accept it because you don't have that time to question it. And even if you could, what would you do? You've got all
Right.
this
You
other
don't
stuff
you
in the
don't
immediate
have the
proxy.
energy.
Yeah.
Right, you don't have the energy. And they even point that in the book that the lower class, the proles, that they call them, basically the lower class people, like they're just so beaten down on life that the higher class just expects them to not even fight back because what's the point? Like that's the
Yeah.
whole mentality between the two parties, and like that still happens today. We see the lower class now, the what we would call below the poverty line. You see them struggle financially. You see a bunch of people live in the same house because they can't afford a place on their own, and therefore we're just trying to get through life. Therefore we can't get ahead or get to the next class system, and therefore we're all stuck in where we are, and it takes so much work and effort and just time for someone to move classes, and
Well,
therefore the high class tends to stay in the high, and the middle class can go up and down, but it's everyone generally stays in their own system.
well, also, here's what's fascinating. I'm not going to comment on my views about what Luigi did, but as far as the aftermath of it goes, the suppression of Luigi as the symbol, right? It is very interesting to watch them trying to really push it down, because whatever you think about the incident, they don't want us to spark a revolution, right? And so they want to kind of control and be like, hey, if you dare speak up, this is what happens. And so yeah, it's kind of sending that message of don't mess with us because you will get your ass kicked. When in
Right.
reality, right, I mean, there's so many wonderful movies like V for Vendetta, right? There's that quote of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, the people shouldn't fear their government, the government should fear its
The government
people.
fears people.
That one's a little bit more violent than I would ascribe to as far as how I think things should operate. But you start to see all of this, and I don't know, where it all goes.
Yeah.
There's a side to me that worries, like that this doesn't end well. I don't
No,
know.
it doesn't. And I think that's the I think that's the bittersweet, unfortunate part for both of us because we understand what's happening. We also see the downside to it. We see the negatives. We understand the negatives and how it actually impacts us. And I think that's what makes it quote unquote depressing or sad or why we're angry because we actually understand it. The more we understand, the more sad and angry we get. Um, and that's where people, and that goes back to the person, and then you see the differences between who's ready to learn more, who actually has the courage to stand out and speak out against those who are pressing you. And we see it in today. We're seeing, not to make this so political, but this is a political book. But it's like we see all these people getting detained without due process, but they can't say anything. They don't have the power because someone else captured them and they're beating them down into submission. We're still seeing it today, and that's frustrating knowing that we I don't know, we individually, like I myself, I can't do anything about it. I can witness it, I can't do anything about it. But there are people in power who could do something about it but allow it to happen. um, and we see it
Yeah,
today.
yeah. I mean, I was like one of my frustrating points. I feel like we've reached a point in history that we could just have it so good, right? We are actively choosing, from my perspective, not to live in a utopia, right? There's so
Hmm.
many. We could solve world hunger. We could solve, so like if we just were like, okay, what's our collective problems in the world, and let's go tackle it, and whatever else, like let's go. We have the means, we have the technology, we have all the stuff.
Right.
Uh, it's at our disposal. We just can't seem to
We
get
had the
out of our
wrong
way. So it's
Right.
just
But
wild to me.
also, like, we have the wrong people allocating money to the wrong places for the wrong, ideas. And yeah, I totally agree. Like, we could be in a better world, is we choose not to. And that's what we have to like blame as of as a collective too. But like, I know you and I didn't vote for a certain someone, but we know other people did, as the majority like affects smaller people too. So it's a very frustrating thing. We understand why this book is banned, because it is a current reflection of today's society. It'll be a current reflection of our society in 40 years from now, and like, we're closer to 2050 now, not to put a timestamp on this show, but we're closer to 2050 now than we were when this book was actually written in 1949. So, and nothing really changes.
Well,
So
to
I
be fair,
guarantee you, in another 70 years, this book will still be relevant. It'll probably still be banned.
to be fair, we'll always, from now on, we're always only going to be closer to 2050 than 1984. So doesn't matter if it's today or in the future. That will only be more truer in the future. So
Right. Well, I only say it because we are like a handful of years to 2050 than we were to decades of years
yeah,
to when this originally came out in 1984.
yeah, I get.
Anything else? I mean, I know we covered a lot of things and we were kind of here and there, but like, just I think it kind of, when you read the book and you see the different chapters of, Winston's life, for him questioning the system, him getting oppressed by the system, all the torturing, and then him afterwards of like, or like the actual torturing system and what it did to him and the aftermath, and like now how he thinks. Yeah, what the overall summary that you
Yeah,
read.
the overall summary. I guess I'll conclude with this. We talked about the notion that it's a very hard book to swallow because of how it ends, and like and at no point really gets really happy. Even when Julia and Winston are together, it's not necessarily bliss. It's done under the, you know, whatever, watchful eye and stuff like that, which, is a very real thing in today's society. I remember an article from a few years ago of like 100,000, hidden cameras found in London. It's like, yeah, those are only the ones you found. So imagine
Right.
how many more there actually are. So, the idea that we're constantly being watched, pretty real. We have a cell phone that pretty much tracks anything they would kind of want about us. But anyway, what makes it difficult, I think, ultimately is, even though Winston is the protagonist, we can very easily put ourselves in the shoes of Winston, right? He is analogous. He is our surrogate into this world. And when he feels defeated, we're defeated. Like, it's a very easy
We
connection
defeated.
to make. And so I think that's what makes it the most gripping of all. So,
Absolutely. I completely and utterly agree. Um and going with that, it's just like, we see all these people now in our lives, even in Winston's life. He first thought they were someone, ends up being someone completely different, and then like, as he goes back and recollects his memories, they change. And so you see how one thing affects the other, affects the differences, affects the current present, how you think. It's crazy.
I'll say that
So
to that
whew,
notion, real
yeah.
quick, to that notion, I think that's a lot of people are sort of grappling with that. Ever since COVID, I think it's accelerated a lot of stuff, and it just has continued where, people that we might have thought as one thing kind of show their more true colors. And in storytelling, action reveals character, right? And so,
Right.
because of the heightened nature of our world through COVID and now whatever we may be going through with, you know, wars and other stuff, economy and blah, blah, people are forced to act. And, that reveals more of their character than just them talking about their character. And I think a lot of people are disillusioned with various people in their life who they thought was one way, but now to them is a different way. And I get that's hard and stuff like that. but if anything, I think above all, this book cautions just see the humanity in all of us. Like it could be so easy to slip into conspiracy theories, quote unquote, wrong kinds of
Right.
thinking, miseducation, all that. And and so if we see other people that we think are that, let's have the respect for them and really put ourselves in their shoes. And conversely, also kind of do a self-check on ourselves of like, what are my inherent biases that I could be
Hmm.
completely wrong about?
Right.
So I think that's the cautionary tale.
Right. Our self-awareness and have more empathy for people, which I feel like we're lacking. And go get therapy. Go through therapy. It's great. We have conversations like this to like question things, talk about it, maybe understand it more as we about it to other people. Um, this episode should be brought by BetterHelp, because if you're not in therapy and you want to understand more about yourself and stuff, go through therapy. Like that's what's helping me understand the world better and understand people better. So like they're just different avenues of how we see and ingest what's in front of us. Um, yeah, and whew, I mean, it was a very interesting book. I'm probably gonna have to read this again just to like really, really. I mean, I there's a lot. It's a very, very dense book. But at the end of the day, it's like it's still relevant, and you can understand why it's banned. Um, and so there has been a lot of, I mean, this book, when it came out, there was like a lot of good reception of it, a lot of reflections of then current society with World War II, and there's been a lot of adaptations, surprisingly. I was surprised to find out there's been a bunch of feature length film adaptations, back in 1950s. There was, the most recent one would be 2023. There was another one like in 84. So like every few decades you have an adaptation. There were also television adaptations. CBS Studio One had a series back in 1953. Mind you, this book came out in 1949. So just a few years after, like, they were already adapting this book into different versions. There's a radio version, theater versions, and operatic versions, surprisingly so. So like this has been a story that's been told over and over and over again. It's still relevant. And I think that's, I don't want to kick myself, but like, that another reason why we're doing this book club is to expose ourselves to books that we probably haven't read or ever thought to read. And I would have never thought to read this, but with being the self-awareness of where we are in current society, I was like, oh, there's something about this book that makes people question why it should be banned. And my curiosity was like, let's read it. Let's understand the world better. And I think I do. Just a little bit more.
Right on. Well, that's a good takeaway. Now we have the amazing duty of transitioning into what we've been reading and what
Yeah.
we will be
I
reading.
was like, yeah.
So,
So this was a heavy book that we read. What other books have you read as of late? Maybe fun, maybe more lighter, hopefully.
uh, lighter because I haven't. Yeah, no, May's just been a little bit hectic. So, just haven't had as much time as I would have liked to dedicate to reading. But all the same, it's been good to read this, and we'll talk about what we've got coming up. I don't know if it's lighter fare. I think it's slightly lighter fare at least, so we'll see.
A little, definitely lighter. Yeah, you and I as well. We are very busy working bees. I haven't read much this month either, but I've been actually the most interesting books, because I'm an artist also. It's like I haven't really been reading novels. I've been reading drawing art books. I've been drawing a lot. So it's more about like the structures of anatomy and musculature and the different angles of, light and how it reflects on different objects and people. And if you're turned 45 degrees this way, the light turns this way. So like that's the kind of stuff I've been ingesting of the last month. And it's fascinating. I went to art school, but there were certain classes that I wasn't exposed to for, drawing and realism in that way. So like I'm learning more about that side of art, and it's fascinating. So not so much novels, but I am reading.
Well, that
And
sounds like a fun, so for sure.
yeah, just the forever artist, the forever student. So upcoming books you have for the
Yeah.
month of June, which I'm really
Yes, so
excited
we
for.
have Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Reckoning of Roku, which is book 5 by Randy Rebay. So yeah, it felt like I'm a fan of Avatar. You're a fan of Avatar. We're fans of Legend of Korra.
I I just I might be a little bit of a fan. This is Appa. I have Legend of Korra art all over my apartment, and Avatar is over on that side. Yes, I am a big fan. I'm very excited. Keep going.
Yeah, so I don't know what the book is about, but we're gonna learn, and we know it's set in the world of Avatar and Korra. So looking forward to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that too. I actually do own all the books, but again, we have proven we are busy people. I haven't read them. It's just unfortunately, like I have collected them, I haven't read them. But I've watched the show, ingested it millions of times. Listened to the podcast, follow all the people, met most of the people. So I'm a very, very big fan of the world, obviously, and I'm excited for this book. Again, I don't have a book for July yet, but we'll have a choice by the next time we do this. As per usual, there's just so much in the future that I can't think about what's happening in 2 months from now. So yeah, we'll have our choice soon for the next.
Yeah.
Oh,
So and
all
then
right. Thanks everyone for joining us. And
we do have an August
still,
book,
where can
though.
I find you?
I do want to mention we do have an August
Oh,
book.
do you? All right.
We'll talk about lighter fare. So directed by Jimmy Burrows, which he's a famous director. Friends, Will and Grace, Cheers, Frasier, I believe. So all kinds of stuff. Very simple read, but if you like those TV shows, it gives you obviously an insight, behind the scenes look. So I'm looking forward to it. Again, it's a little bit different because it's not fiction, but should be fun. So
Yeah, I definitely. I grew up with Jim James Burrows. I believe he's always credited as James, but Jimmy. A lot of he's very very relevant to our generation and even our generations from the 80s. He did Cheers. Like I'm really looking forward to that book as well. So fun stuff to look forward to. Thank you everyone for reading, following along, and keep reading, everyone. We will see you for our next book.